What began in June 2024 as a space to amplify autistic and neurodivergent voices has grown into something far bigger. A platform for raw, honest conversations about neurodivergence, disability, burnout, inclusion, mental health, and how our identities shape the way we move through the world. From the start, our mission has been clear: to go beyond the headlines, beyond stereotypes, and explore the real lived experiences that often go unheard. Over the past year, we've spoken with parents, professionals, educators, advocates, and everyday people, all united by a commitment to building a more inclusive and accessible world. But what's mattered most is the community. Those of you who listen, share, and remind us, finally, someone gets it. Thank you for being here. This is just the beginning.
Looking for authentic conversations that go beneath the surface? Tune in now to the Deep Dive podcast. Visit us at www.deepdiveau.net. That's deepdiveau.net. And follow us across your favorite platforms: YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Facebook. Just search at the Deep Dive AU. Join us as we dive deep into stories of neurodivergence, lived experience, and creating a more inclusive world. The Deep Dive podcast. Conversations that matter. Stories that connect.
This is the Deep Dive podcast. And here is your host, Michael Coles.
Megan Wood is a passionate advocate and public servant dedicated to fair access, workplace rights, and systemic reform. Her journey is deeply shaped by lived experience. As a teenager, she faced a severe cardiac condition, and for over 15 years, undiagnosed illnesses like HEDS, POTS, and endometriosis added to her challenges. Misdiagnosis and medical dismissal delayed the right care until recent surgeries and accurate diagnosis gave her back both her functionality and quality of life. In 2024, Megan was formally diagnosed with autism and ADHD. This turning point gave her clarity, self-understanding, and a stronger drive to advocate for others. Today, she manages chronic illnesses with resilience while using her voice to push for early diagnosis, trauma-informed care, and medical accountability. She speaks at forums, contributes to research, and co-designs inclusive policy, championing equity for young women and neurodivergent individuals. Megan Wood, welcome to the Deep Dive.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
So how's your lived experience with chronic illness and disability shaped your understanding of neurodivergence, and how have those intersected in your journey?
So I've lived with chronic illness from a young age, so that really shaped sort of how I experienced and interpreted the world. Over time, I began to recognize patterns in executive function, sensory sensitivity, and cognitive fatigue that align with neurodivergent traits. I've got first-degree relatives as well who have been diagnosed as neurodivergent, so that would have been an indicator for me as well. I think the challenge for me in that case was that they were male relatives, and oftentimes boys get diagnosed and picked up for those things more so than women do. Especially growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of things probably got missed in my case. I realized as I got older that chronic illness and neurodivergence overlap in a big way, and they both affect energy, communication, and obviously your ability to participate in work and society. And having that intersection of both of them sort of helped me understand the importance of having inclusive environments and flexible systems. And I think one of the good things about having a late diagnosis with neurodivergence was that because I had been dealing with chronic illness and disability for such a long time, I'd already had some accommodations put in place with pacing and different things like that to help manage my energy and capacity in that regard. So once I got the diagnosis with autism and ADHD, a lot of that sort of was able to slot straight into that with minor adaptations to sort of support more broadly. And those accommodations, you know, were really, really helpful and continue to help me every day. And I guess as well, you know, the intersection of both of them has helped me to understand self-advocacy better and where to look for information and find resources, and how to build sort of a better sense of community with people who experience similar things.
Okay, so can you share more about any late or misdiagnoses, whether neurological or health related, and how they impacted on your personal and professional trajectory?
Yeah, so I experienced symptoms for years before I had any sort of formal diagnosis. That's both with my medical side of things and also from a neurodivergence perspective. Um, for a really long time, I was in sort of denial about it and just had the mindset to push through. But that didn't work, and I was getting sick all the time. And when I wasn't sick, I was just completely mentally drained and exhausted, which I now recognize as being signs of neurodivergent burnout. And lack of diagnosis obviously also led to misunderstandings in school and workplaces and difficulty with accessing appropriate support. So it honestly just felt like I was treading water for years and years, and no one would listen or take me seriously. And it was also really, really expensive and really difficult to access support in the first place, just to get the ball rolling, let alone finding the right person to speak to, because I didn't know how to articulate what I needed, or what I was experiencing. And some of the things I was experiencing I thought were normal. So it made it difficult to even start the process. So once I did finally get diagnosed, and I will say, like, the earliest diagnosis I had was when I was 16, but that was only a very small piece of the bigger picture. It's taken me over 15 years to actually get to where I am in terms of diagnosis, and the most recent ones were only made at the start of the year. So it's an ongoing process of elimination, specialist appointments, multidisciplinary support. It's been a lot. And I guess it's really validated my experience once I got that diagnosis for different things, because you start to believe that you're crazy, or like there's something obviously mentally wrong with me, because so many people keep telling me there's nothing wrong. But 9 times out of 10, it's very surface level. They don't dig deep. They don't ask enough questions. And because I had trouble articulating sometimes, it really made it hard. And so it's taught me how to advocate more effectively and to really prepare ahead of appointments with lists and notes, and to do a bit of research before going in, so that I had more questions and knew sort of how to guide it as a patient, and being more active and less passive as a patient. Having diagnosis really also, I would say, shifted how I view my strengths and my limitations, especially in professional settings. Managing like pacing and adding reminder alarms in my day, and having like that interdisciplinary management that I mentioned, have made a really big difference. And I think, like, previously, if I wasn't able to do something because I had functioned at a high level for too long and then hit a wall of burnout, I would blame myself and I would beat myself up about it. And it would just make me feel like, there was something fundamentally wrong with me. But knowing now the reason why, I know what I can do to slow that down or prevent that from happening, and also just take myself out of that mindset completely. So that difference is just crazy. And just to say on top of that too, like, there's a what if factor, right? Like, I consider, what if I had support from a young age? What if I did get diagnosed when I was younger? What if I did have the right people looking after my healthcare from day one? Would I have had earlier diagnosis, management, and treatment? Would I have been able to go to uni? Would I have been able to have, stayed in a career pathway that I thought I would have been in for a longer time? What would be different? But I think the hard thing about that is the what ifs can start to really get to you. And so I've made it really important to myself to consider the now and be grateful that I do have the access to the supports that I do have, and the knowledge that I have, and be able to focus on the future and what I can achieve moving forward instead.
Okay, so when you were eventually diagnosed, what feelings emerged? Was it relief, grief, or a mix? How did that influence your sense of identity?
It was a real mix, honestly. And I'm still actively processing it. And from the journey that I've experienced, I've developed complex post-traumatic stress disorder through just navigating the medical system, the way I've been treated by managers and coworkers, ex-friends, and even family at times, and finally being told, yes, we found the reason. It's just a huge wave of overwhelming emotions, and working through that. I tried to do it independently initially, but then made the decision to go to therapy, and that's made a world of difference for me. And through that process, I found out I've got alexithymia, which is obviously really common in autism and ADHD, where you struggle to identify feelings, which makes it in turn difficult to process them and break them down to understand them properly. And I tend to intellectualize a lot of circumstances and situations rather than actually, taking it in, absorbing it, and then being able to process and move on. So, rather than compartmentalizing and suppressing things and just getting on with it like I always have, I'm now taking the time and doing the hard work to go back over everything that I've experienced and break it down for what it actually is, how it actually made me feel, why, and understanding that like my brain just processes that differently, and what might work for a neurotypical person doesn't work the same way for me, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just learning how to process and manage it. And having the diagnosis of AuDHD, it just made everything click and make sense. So, I've always been told that like I was a weird kid, I was a weird girl, and understanding that those missed social cues and the social cues that I was hyper aware of when I felt like I didn't fit in, and having like a busy brain with all the tabs open, and having like the echolalia where there's just random things repeating in my brain all the time. I just thought that was normal and everybody experienced that, but it's not. And understanding what those things are and breaking that down has made such a difference, because it's like, okay, that's what that is. You're not crazy. We can actually work on, we can't remove it, but we can work to understand the why and the how, and how we can support that better. And in addition to that, for years of my whole life, I thought I had panic attacks. Turns out they were sensory overload meltdowns. And I got told that I just had really bad anxiety. But it's not anxiety. It never really was to that degree. And the difference that's made on my mental health as well, because I could never understand, like I always felt like I was crazy, but I'm not. And yeah, it made a really big difference in dialogue in doctors' offices as well. So I had a doctor one time tell me that I was an anxious, depressed, attention-seeking young woman, and being told that, no, you have anxiety, complex post-traumatic stress disorder from everything you've gone through, depression as a result of everything you've gone through, and it's autism and ADHD, and this is why you feel this way. It's a huge difference. Having that knowledge, huge difference. It's like a weight's been lifted, and I'm really, really grateful that I was able to access that and get that diagnosis and have the resources. And now I'm in a position where I can also try to help other friends and family that I can see those patterns in as well, to gently navigate that process of realization and asking for further support and review. Because if I had someone to help me on my personal journey and advocate and support me, like that would have made such a difference. And if I can prevent any suffering that I experience for someone else, I'll always absolutely do that.
Okay, so how do you practice self-advocacy when managing chronic illness and neurodivergence in high-stress or compliance-driven environments?
So I always start by understanding my rights on the outset. So if I've, accepted a new job or I'm considering a new position, I always read over my employment contract in detail, and I check the relevant award or enterprise agreement. And what I do is I identify any clauses around personal leave, flexible work, special leave arrangements or entitlements. And then some places, like if you've got an enterprise agreement, may have additional provisions for things like disability leave or, employee mental health support programs or different things like that. So understanding what's available and your rights around what's available in the workplace that you're looking to work at is the first step, because if they don't have accommodations already, it's something you're going to have to request and build, which can take time. Not impossible, but sometimes it can be more beneficial to start somewhere that already has that half the work done. So I check that first, and then I communicate early on very clearly with my managers about my needs, and I have documentation and medical support where necessary. And in my case, I really prefer to keep an open dialogue so I can be clear and frank about what's happening. If I have a flare up or an emergency of some type, they have a bit more understanding of what's going on. And I'd like to keep that open dialogue to build a sense of trust and understanding, because I found that it makes a really big difference when people understand the why behind something, rather than me saying I need to take a day off for medical reasons, which you're legally entitled to do. You don't have to disclose medical information. If my manager knows that I've got XYZ conditions and I'm having a flare up, it's more likely they're going to be a bit more like, okay, we understand this is going to take a couple of days. And it's less frustration on their side because there's a mutual understanding and education there. And I'll also provide resources to them to help them understand my circumstances better too, which just helps them provide better support, and they have a better education base too for other people that may come across in their lifetime that they can offer that additional support to as well. And then I also set boundaries around workload and recovery time so I can prevent burnout actively as well. So things like having regular rest breaks, stretching, and using calendar and alarm tools has been hugely beneficial for me. And in terms of ongoing self-advocacy, anytime where I've bumped into someone who doesn't understand or doesn't want to understand, it's then going back to the fundamentals of looking at my rights in the workplace. What sort of supports can I access that can help me navigate a situation? Is that going to people and culture? Is that going through to, a regulatory body for further assistance or support or mediation? Do I need to get a letter from my doctor to state more explicitly my required needs? Things like that. So you can sort of just mitigate from the outset. It helps in the long term when you know what's going on. I think the hard part is when you don't know what's going on, but something's wrong. It makes it really hard to legitimize your lived experience and what you're feeling and what's going on. And in those situations, what I found is still being honest upfront is the best thing to do. I have had some very frank conversations with past and present managers just saying, hey, I don't know what's wrong, but this is what's happening. I really don't feel well. I've got this appointment coming up. This is what's happening. And they just, okay, no worries, we'll work with you. And if they don't work with you and they're not going to be flexible to support your needs, it might be something to reassess about where you are. And having access to flexible working arrangements when you've got chronic health, disability, neurodivergence, any sorts of needs of that nature is almost essential. It's not even necessarily an optional thing. It's you need it because you need the recovery time and the energy reserve to manage things. So yeah.
Okay, so what inspired your transition from administration and business development into advocacy and compliance-related roles? Was entrepreneurship part of that vision?
So entrepreneurship was actually the reason I went into the admin and business development roles initially. So because of the challenges I had accessing the healthcare system, especially in my early 20s, I found it really, really difficult to hold down a full-time job because I was managing my health full-time and trying to work full-time at the same time without having proper treatment, medications or diagnosis. So it was just impossible, and I was constantly exhausted and fatigued. So I got let go from a job in my early 20s. That was really, really disappointing to me because I had been honest and they had told me they would offer support and help, and what the reality of the position was didn't reflect what was marketed, unfortunately, and that does happen quite a lot. So I found myself in a position where I was really down in the dumps and thought like there's just got to be a better way to do this, and I started my own business, which was MH freelancing, and I pretty much worked out that I could reverse market all these skills and knowledge that I have and market them out as individual things. So, you know, executive administration support, and assistance support, you know, bookkeeping, payroll, business development management and planning, setting up startup structures for new businesses, grant writing, like all these different things that I had built skill set over years, I could use them myself and market them all out broadly, and then also flexibly market my time so that I had full-time hours but on my terms. And I actively did that for 2 years, and I really, really loved it. And the reason I moved away from that model is because I got to a point where I had too many clients to manage on my own. And I was at a position in time where I'd had a pretty big and traumatic life event that had occurred. And I didn't have the capacity to manage my business full time at the same time as growing it. And I couldn't do both of those things and manage my mental health and my declining health at that stage. So I ended up taking some time off. I think I took about a year off to work out what I wanted to do. Forever grateful for my partner, who helped support me through that period of time. And that was also a period where I got some formal diagnosis with my chronic health conditions, which really helped me access support and help get me back on track. And, you know, from there, advocacy has always been something that I'm quite vocal about, but it was a time where I started to get really vocal about it and the importance of it, and the impact it had on my life and the way that I thought my life would go, and it didn't because of my health and the way I'd been treated and the experience I'd had, really pushed me into the advocacy space. Compliance related roles came organically from my background with the admin and business. I really like the structure of compliance roles, which tickles the autism part of my brain really nicely. And there's also a lot of room in the roles that I have chosen to work in, to be creative as well and have problem solving elements as well. So I'm sort of ticking the boxes for the things that I enjoy doing, so I'm not bored and I'm supported. And I guess the reason I've moved into that space more than anything is when you work for yourself, it's great for flexibility, but there's no support buffer. When you work for a business, or, you know, in my case, I'm a public servant, there is a lot more of a safety net in terms of your leave entitlements and things like that. So, you know, if I was sick for 2 weeks and couldn't do any work with clients, being self-employed, I don't get an income. If I'm sick for 2 weeks in a full-time job where I have access to sick leave, I can at least have my sick leave paid. So that was largely the reason for the transition, and just managing stress. But I do still do some of my admin and business development stuff on the side for friends and family. And occasionally, you know, if a client will pop up from the past and just ask me to help with the project here or there, I'll still jump in if I've got capacity, because I do really enjoy it. But yeah, I think long term, entrepreneurship is still something that I would consider. I think right now, for where I am in my life and what's happening, the stability is more important for me where I am at the moment, though.
Okay. So what strengths or skills tied to neurodivergence have supported your success in project management or analytical work?
So I would say hyperfocus is probably a really big one. It helps me deep dive into the complex problems and identify patterns that other people might miss. I'm very good with my efficiency and attention to detail. I can read very fast and type very fast. So those things all together for reading and project management and building out, you know, plans for things, it's great. I love it. And I guess too, like that attention to detail with regards to reviewing documents and identifying inconsistencies and ensuring compliance, applying relevant legislation, laws, that sort of stuff. It all ties in together. I also have a really strong memory for systems and process supports. So I am very good at, like, I can see a problem and my brain will build out a map for how to navigate that problem, and I can translate that quite effectively. So being in professional work that's tied with compliance, project management, or analytics in my case, and even data, those things are great for me. And because I've got the empathy and the lived experience from what I've already gone through, even in other jobs, I can sort of anticipate the challenges that other people might face as well, as far as clients or co-workers. So, I know the assumption is that a lot of people with neurodivergence, lack empathy. I don't buy that. I think that we can be hyper empathetic. And in my case, like I do really feel for people, and I try to do my best to help and support wherever I can. And those strengths all tie into that, because if I can see a problem, my brain automatically tries to jump to problem solve, and I process information very quickly as well. Sometimes a little bit too quickly, and I need to slow down and rein it in a bit just to make sure I've got everything. But yeah, I would say there's a lot of strengths and skills tied to neurodivergence that really make me very good at my job.
Okay, so I'll start again. Did misdiagnosis or being undiagnosed for a long time delay or complicate your ability to access reasonable support, accommodations, or supports?
Yeah, definitely. In the workplace. So without having a formal diagnosis, it got really difficult to explain why I needed flexibility or adjustments. And I really felt like I had to push through or over explain or justify my needs. And once I got diagnosed, I had what I felt was a more like concrete basis to put my claims on. And I was able to access support. So flexible hours, remote work, adjusted deadlines, things like that, even just adjusted workload, depending on what was happening. Because, if I was having a flare up, for example, with my health, it's not that my brain's not working. It's just that my body's fighting me. So the fatigue can slow me down. And so that really hyper focused, fast processing information that I'm usually very good with and very efficient with slows down a lot. So having caseload adjusted and things like that to reflect how I'm feeling is really, really helpful. And I wasn't able to access a lot of that prior to having a diagnosis. And I think it really highlighted how important early recognition and understanding is for workplace inclusion. And I guess on that note too, like the advocacy in workplace settings is really, really important, because if you have other people that are coming through that have the same problems, but they don't feel safe or supported to talk about them, then it makes it difficult, because then you see that they start to fall behind. And that's when, you get the performance management and all that sort of stuff comes into play, when really it would just be a simple adjustment, and simple adjustments and reasonable accommodations make a world of difference. It can make or break an individual. And even having the wrong diagnosis, which I had initially, that made a difference as well, because it still was a diagnosis. And having something formal and tangible that I can have a doctor write to made my employers take it more seriously than me coming in and saying I have debilitating migraines or XYZ, because in their mind it's not been substantiated as a claim. So it does make a big difference.
Okay, so in your experience, how can professionals support employees with chronic health or neurodivergent needs who face workplace conflict or discrimination?
I would say employees with chronic health or neurodivergent needs. Sorry, Michael. I just need to have a quick read of this question again. So professionals, so employees with chronic health. Okay, can you please ask me that question again?
Okay, so in your experience, how can professionals support employees with chronic health or neurodivergent needs who face workplace conflict or discrimination?
So I feel that the first step comes with understanding the needs of your staff. That's really the first thing. And like I said, like having that open dialogue with my manager has made such a big difference. And, I've managed other people as well and encouraged that open dialogue with my staff previously for that purpose. Because when you understand the root of the issue, and what can be done to assist, it's a lot easier to help tackle the bigger picture and break it down into smaller parts. When you don't know what's going on or you don't have the whole picture, it leads to assumption and judgment, and it can cause discrimination as a result of that. So, having that understanding, I think, is the first key pillar. Second to that is, once you know what's wrong, research, go for further supporting information and ask questions. Is it something that we can do that is, if you're in a workplace that doesn't have flexible working arrangements or work from home, like, is that something we can provide temporarily or long term? How can we approach that? And I think too, when you have someone that you're working with, and you notice other staff members making comments or, making jabs or bullying in the workplace, if you see it, call it out. Like, that's the most important thing, because if you let it go unspoken for, it just continues, and then that negatively affects the workplace culture for everyone. And I think the biggest thing that is missed in workplaces these days is that some people still think that having accessibility is only for disabled people. Accessibility benefits everyone. You think about it, their footpaths, were made sloped for wheelchair access. They are now used for people who ride bikes, have scooters, push prams. Like, it's for everyone. And it's exactly the same in the workplace. Before COVID, I begged my boss at the time to have flexibility to work from home, and I was told it wasn't possible and couldn't be done. And then as soon as the pandemic happened, suddenly everybody could do it. And it was crazy to me, because it's like, this is something I have been asking for and trying to get for years and was told was impossible, and now the whole world has it. And it's things like that. Advocacy in the workplace starts from the first conversation, and then finding solutions and calling out discrimination when you see it, and training it out of people and working on that culture.
Okay, so can you share a moment where your role in stakeholder engagement or project delivery felt especially challenging due to your chronic illness or executive functioning challenges?
Yeah, so this, I would say, in a previous role I had when I was working in recruitment, was quite challenging. My body gave up on me in a really big way. I was in hospital for over a week and came out of the hospital in a wheelchair. And it took me a lot of physio and rebuilding, like, coordination and stamina skills to have the tolerance to be able to function normally again. And when I came back to work in that space, I still had really big challenges with chronic fatigue, and my executive function was not quite as sharp as it normally would be. And I found that I was getting overwhelmed with tasks more easily and having difficulty just even sitting in the office for a full 8-hour workday. And it was really, really challenging, because I was able to work really well when I felt well, but when I didn't feel well, the quality of my work suffered as a result. And it became really hard to explain and how to manage that. And again, having open dialogue with my manager at the time did definitely help with that. And we came up with, a flexible arrangement where I could log in and out, as needed to manage my capacity. But it got really, really hard, and I really struggled mentally with that. And the support I had at the time really did make a big difference. But ultimately, it still, in that situation, resulted in me moving away from that role, and I had to go into another industry because I couldn't manage the fast-paced environment that I was working in with the way that my health was at that point in time. So it did become difficult. In a more recent role, I had to have my cane with me because I use it for mobility support on some days. And I had seen this particular client multiple times without needing my cane. And I don't obviously go around talking to clients in work settings that I have, invisible disabilities. And so when I came there and had a cane, and I'm a healthy presenting young female with a walking stick, that reaction was jarring and kind of rude, and was a bit eye-opening for me. And it really made me feel like having a mobility aid was so negatively looked upon in that setting that I had to sort of go back and sort of talk with my manager at the time about what do we do when I'm in these situations. And my manager really backed me up with support and just said, you've done nothing wrong, and there's nothing wrong with using a mobility aid. You were mentally, cognitively fine. You were functioning well enough to be attending work. You could still do your job. There's no difference in how you would be without it. And navigating that sort of changed my perception on it a little bit. I think it was just very surprising on how the reaction was. And I think I got used to being in my own little bubble where my friends, family, and colleagues already knew that of me, and that it is a dynamic disability, that sometimes I do need mobility aids. And that's not something that everybody broadly knows. And it can be challenging to explain that in work settings.
Okay. So how do you manage burnout in this space?
So I still struggle with this a little bit, but I have put in a lot of different techniques and a lot of time and effort to manage it better. I monitor my energy levels, and I use a lot of different pacing strategies to avoid overcommitment. That's the biggest thing. Overcommitment was my problem because I have, fear of missing out. I hate the fact that I've lost so much time to my disability and health problems. And when I feel well, I just want to be able to do everything and see everyone and experience my life. And it can be really hard to balance that, because if I overdo it, that makes me flare up. I get sick. It slows me down. I see less people, do less life. So it's that energy pacing is like the critical thing. I also prioritize my rest and recovery, even when it feels counterproductive. And on days where, I feel like I could have done more, I take a second and actually consider the fact that previously I would have pushed myself too far, and that would have resulted in me being tired and burnt out for 2 days after. So instead, I reach a place where I'm comfortable and I'm content. And then I can continue that level of energy throughout the rest of the week without feeling like I have burnt myself out or pushed too far. And I also encourage my friends and my family to set boundaries and recognize those early signs of burnout now too. And that peer support and community connection, I think, are the key to staying grounded and being open and communicating about how I'm feeling and where I'm at. That has made a really big difference as well. Being vulnerable and talking about what I'm going through instead of just keeping it trapped in my brain, that's made a really big difference too.
Okay, and the last question we'd like to ask everyone here on the Deep Dive podcast, if there's one bit of advice in 30 seconds or less that you would like to give, what would that be?
Never give up. That would be it. I would say, if you know that something isn't right, or you don't feel like you got an answer that explains everything the way that you needed it to be explained to you, or thoroughly enough, or something doesn't quite fit, don't take the first answer. Dig deeper, research, ask questions, look for support, and don't give up until you've reached a place where you feel comfortable, confident, happy, and supported.
And on that note, Megan Wood, thank you so much for being part of the Deep Dive podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
You can connect with Megan on Instagram at megan.ann.w